Dear friends, Kevin O'Leary here. I need you to think back to where you were at 3:17 in the morning on January 1st, 2026. Most of you were asleep. Some of you were still at New Year's Eve parties. Some of you were drunk. Some of you were kissing loved ones at midnight, popping champagne, celebrating the arrival of a new year. While you were doing all of that, while your guard was down, while your phone was face down on a table, while the idea of checking a market chart felt like a crime against joy, something very different was happening. Quietly. Precisely. At 3:17 a.m. Eastern Time, when attention was at its absolute lowest, the silver market didn't just move. It fell down a staircase. Now I want you to sit with that image for a moment. The entire Western world distracted. Liquidity thin, traders away, screens unattended. And right then, right at that moment, someone was very much awake. Someone was very active. Someone was pushing buttons while you were counting down from 10 to 0. That's not drama. That's timing. Markets don't usually make their most aggressive moves when everyone is alert, caffeinated, and watching. They wait. Just like pickpockets don't work in empty streets, they work in crowds. And New Year's night is the biggest crowd of distraction you get all year. So, here's the question you should already be asking yourself. Who trades size at 3:17 a.m. on New Year's Day? Who decides that this, of all moments, is the right time to unload massive positions? And maybe more importantly, why would anyone choose a time when almost no one can respond? I'm not here to shout at you. I'm not here to sell you fear. I'm here to slow this moment down and pull it apart piece by piece. Because once you understand why events like this happen when you're not looking, you stop being surprised by them. And when you stop being surprised, you stop being easy to manipulate. Enjoy the celebration. You've earned it. But understand this: markets don't celebrate holidays, they exploit them. Now let's talk about what actually happened, because this is where emotions need to step aside and numbers take the microphone. At 3:17 a.m., silver was trading around $77 and change. 17 minutes later, the price was sitting near 68. That's not a drift. That's not healthy volatility. That's a 12+% drop in the time it takes to brew bad hotel coffee. Markets don't normally behave like that unless something breaks or something is forced. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't lightning striking once and disappearing. In the 14 days leading up to that moment, silver experienced 3 separate crashes of similar violence. Different dates, same behavior, same speed, same outcome. If this were poker, you'd already be suspicious of the deck. Look at the pattern. Late December thin participation. Early January holiday conditions. Overnight hours when screens are dark and attention is gone. Every single drop happened when liquidity was weakest, when the fewest buyers were around to absorb pressure. That's not coincidence. That's a recurring setup. Markets, like people, develop habits. They repeat what works. And whatever happened here worked at least mechanically. Prices collapsed quickly, stops were triggered, and panic had a chance to do its thing before anyone could ask questions. This is where I want you to pause, because most investors don't. They see a red number and assume the market is discovering reality. But markets don't discover reality at 3 in the morning on a holiday. They exaggerate it. Thin markets don't tell the truth. They amplify whatever force hits them hardest. 3 crashes, 14 days, same conditions, same timing, same vulnerability. At some point, you stop calling that randomness and start calling it behavior. And once you recognize behavior, you can stop reacting to it like a victim and start observing it like a professional. Because patterns don't scream, they whisper, and they only whisper to people who are paying attention. Now let me slow this down, because this is where people usually run off the rails and start seeing villains hiding behind every screen. I'm not interested in conspiracy theater. I'm interested in how the machine actually works. What happened wasn't magic, and it didn't require a room full of people twirling mustaches and pressing a giant red button. Markets don't need villains to malfunction. They just need the right conditions. And those conditions were already in place. You have to separate two things in your mind. First, the system that creates the environment. Second, the people who benefit from what that system produces. Confusing those two is how investors lose credibility, and more importantly, money. Think of the market like a suspension bridge. When traffic is light and evenly spaced, the bridge is stable. But when weight shifts suddenly, when pressure hits all at once, that same bridge starts to sway. Nobody has to push it. The structure does the work for you. Thin liquidity is that sway. Algorithms are the cables pulling tight. Once the motion starts, it feeds on itself. At 3 in the morning on a holiday, the tide is out. There aren't many buyers standing there saying, "Sure, I'll take the other side of that trade." So when selling pressure hits forced, automatic, emotionless, it doesn't meet resistance. It meets air, and prices fall through that air like dominoes lined up too close together. Here's the key point nobody needs to decide to cause panic. Panic is a byproduct. The system is designed to protect institutions from risk, not to protect prices from looking ridiculous at inconvenient hours. When certain thresholds are crossed, machines do what machines are told to do. They sell. Immediately. Without asking whether it's New Year's Day or whether you're still wearing a party hat. And once that selling starts, the people who benefit don't need to intervene. They just need to be awake. They observe. They react. They take advantage of the mess the same way surfers don't create waves. They just know when to paddle. So no, this isn't about secret meetings or shadowy handshakes. It's about structure. It's about timing. It's about a market that behaves very differently when the water is shallow. And if you understand that, you stop wasting energy looking for villains and start focusing on something far more useful, how not to get swept away when the tide goes out. Now I want to talk to you directly, and I want you to stay with me here, because this part makes people uncomfortable. Not angry, uncomfortable. And that's usually where the truth lives. When prices collapse, suddenly your brain doesn't think like an investor. It thinks like a caveman. Something just moved fast, something just broke, and your instincts scream one word: escape. That reaction is not a flaw, it's survival software. It kept your ancestors alive when bushes started shaking, but it is absolutely disastrous in modern markets. You see red numbers flashing on a screen, and your body reacts before your mind catches up. Heart rate goes up. Breathing gets shallow, your inner voice stops asking questions and starts shouting orders. Sell. Get out. Make the pain stop. That's not stupidity. That's biology. Here's the uncomfortable part. Markets know this. They don't attack your silver, your stock, or your account balance first. They attack your confidence. They attack your sense of control. They attack the story you were telling yourself 5 minutes earlier about being disciplined and long-term. And they do it when you're tired, distracted, or emotionally exposed, like, say, 3 in the morning on a holiday. Ask yourself something honestly. If that same price drop had happened at 10:30 in the morning, with coffee in your hand and analysts on television talking calmly, would you have reacted the same way? Or would you have paused, waited, maybe even shrugged? Timing changes psychology. And psychology moves markets far more than fundamentals in moments like this. Retail investors lose not because they're wrong about value, but because they're human. They feel pain faster than they process information. Institutions know this. Systems are built around this. Volatility doesn't need to convince you that something is worthless. It just needs to make you doubt yourself long enough to hand it over. And here's the irony that stings a little. The moment you feel the strongest urge to sell is often the moment someone else feels the strongest urge to buy. Not because they're braver, but because they're calmer. They're not reacting. They're observing you react. I'm not saying this to shame you. Shame is useless. I'm saying it so you recognize the pattern next time it shows up wearing a different costume. Because it will show up again. Different asset. Different headline. Same emotional script. The market isn't evil, it's indifferent. It doesn't care how hard you worked for your money or how confident you felt yesterday. It simply tests one thing over and over again, your ability to stay rational when everything around you is designed to make you emotional. Once you understand that something changes, the screen loses some of its power, the panic feels familiar instead of urgent, and familiarity is the first step toward control. Now, let's pull the curtain back and look at what actually happens behind the screen, because this is the part most people never see. Yet, it controls far more of your financial life than any headline ever will. Forced liquidation sounds dramatic, but the idea is simple. It's what happens when a position becomes too risky for the rules it's operating under. Not emotionally risky, mathematically risky. At some point, a system decides this is no longer acceptable, and it doesn't ask for opinions. It doesn't wait for confirmation. It doesn't care if the trade makes sense long-term. It exits immediately. Here's what surprises people. These decisions aren't made by humans staring at charts with sweaty palms. They're made by automated risk systems that constantly recalculate exposure. When losses reach a certain threshold or when volatility spikes beyond what the model allows, the system pulls the plug. Think of it like the circuit breaker in your house. When the load gets too high, the power cuts off. Not because the house is evil, but because the wiring has limits. Now add thin liquidity to that picture. When markets are deep, there are buyers and sellers stacked at every level. You sell, someone catches it. Price moves, but it moves politely. In thin markets, that depth disappears. It's like stepping onto ice instead of concrete. When a forced liquidation hits during those conditions, the orders don't drip out, they dump. And these aren't polite orders either. They're market orders. Get me out now, not at a good price, not at a fair price, at whatever price exists, if any. When several of those hit back-to-back in a shallow market price doesn't slide. It falls through empty space. That's why timing matters so much. Overnight hours and holidays aren't just quiet, they're structurally fragile. Fewer participants, wider gaps, less ability to absorb shock. The same sell order that would barely make a ripple at midday can create a waterfall at 3 in the morning. And here's the part people miss. Once the first forced liquidation starts, it often triggers the next one. Prices drop, thresholds are crossed, more systems react. It's not chaos, it's a chain reaction. Dominoes falling exactly as designed. No villain needs to shout instructions. No secret meeting is required. The machine does what it was built to do, reduce risk as fast as possible, even if the optics look insane. And while that's happening, the market on your screen is telling a story that feels like reality, but is really just mechanics playing out under stress. Understanding this doesn't make you immune to volatility, but it does something far more valuable. It turns panic into context. And once you have context, you're no longer guessing what's happening. You're watching the system reveal itself exactly as it was engineered to behave. Now here's where the story takes a turn, because while the screen was screaming chaos, the real world was doing something very different. And this is the part most people never check. A few hours after that overnight drop, I started making calls. Not to charts, not to commentators, to dealers. The people who actually have metal, who actually have inventory, who actually have to replace what they sell. And I asked a simple question. Did you lower your prices? You already know the answer, or at least you should. They didn't. In fact, most of them did the opposite. Premiums went up. Not down, up. While the paper price was collapsing, the price to actually buy silver in the real world became more expensive. That alone should make you pause. Think about what that means. If the crash were real, if silver had suddenly lost value, dealers would be racing to unload inventory. Phones would be ringing with panic sellers. Instead, they were fielding buy orders. People weren't asking how fast they could sell. They were asking how much was left. This is the difference between the price you see on a screen and the price that matters when supply is involved. Paper prices are opinions expressed at speed. Physical prices are decisions made under constraint. Dealers don't care what a chart did at 3 in the morning. They care about replacement cost. They care about whether they can restock. They care about demand walking through the door. And this wasn't isolated to one place. Different regions, different markets, same behavior. No collapse in physical pricing, no rush to the exits. If anything, there was a quiet tightening. The kind that doesn't make headlines but tells you far more about reality than a flashing red candle ever will. Here's the framework I want you to remember. Paper price is what someone is willing to trade in a moment. Replacement price is what it costs to get more. Scarcity price is what emerges when demand doesn't blink. Those three are not the same thing, and during stress events they can drift far apart. When that happens, the screen lies by omission. It shows you speed, but not substance. It shows you motion, but not intent. And if you only look at the screen, you'd think the market was rejecting silver. In reality, the market was refusing to let it go cheaply. This is why understanding where price comes from matters. Because when paper collapses and physical stands firm, you're not witnessing a crash. You're witnessing a disconnect. And disconnects don't last forever. They resolve. And when they do, it's not the real market that rushes to meet the paper one. It's the paper market that gets dragged sometimes violently back toward reality. Now, the question everyone asks at this point is the same one, and I can almost hear it through the screen. Fine, Kevin, interesting story. So, what happens next? This is where I'm going to slow everyone down again, because reckless predictions are entertaining but useless. Markets don't move on certainty. They move on conditions. And right now, the most important condition hasn't returned yet full participation. When liquidity comes back, behavior changes. When desks are staffed, when institutional traders stop checking prices on their phones and start checking them on 6 monitors, the market regains depth. That alone alters the equation. Moves become harder to exaggerate. Pressure gets absorbed instead of amplified. So let's talk in scenarios, not promises. In one scenario, liquidity returns, and the gap between paper pricing and real-world demand becomes impossible to ignore. Buyers step in early, not because they're optimistic, but because mispricing is obvious. The market doesn't drift higher politely. It snaps back, fast. The kind of move that makes people who sold in panic stare at the screen, wondering when reality left the room. This happens when confidence returns quickly and nobody wants to be late. In another scenario, the market takes a breath. Selling pressure fades, but buyers don't rush in all at once. Prices stabilize. They move sideways. They test patience. This is the scenario that frustrates everyone because it feels boring after drama. But boredom is not weakness. It's digestion. It's the market processing what just happened without emotion. What determines which path we take isn't hope or fear, it's behavior. Are institutions comfortable stepping back in? Does physical demand stay firm? Do sellers reappear at these levels, or do they hesitate? Those answers don't show up in one candle or one headline. They reveal themselves over days, sometimes weeks. And here's the part that makes people laugh, usually nervously. Both scenarios punish the same mistake: panic. In the fast rebound, panic sellers miss the move. In the slow consolidation, panic sellers get chopped up trying to outsmart noise. Different paths, same outcome. That's why I refuse to give you a magic number or a dramatic date circled in red. The market doesn't care about your calendar. What matters is whether the conditions that caused the distortion still exist. If they don't, prices adjust. If they do, volatility lingers. The real advantage isn't predicting the exact path. It's recognizing that this wasn't a verdict on value. It was a stress event. And stress events don't end with fireworks. They end with clarity. So instead of asking how high or how fast, ask something far more useful. Has the structure changed? Has demand disappeared? Has scarcity evaporated? If the answer is no, then time becomes an ally, not an enemy. And that's not exciting television. But it's how you stay standing when the noise fades and the market starts behaving like a market again. Let me leave you with the part that actually matters, because when the charts stop flashing and the commentators move on to the next crisis, this is what stays with you. Markets are not a morality play. They don't reward effort, intelligence, or good intentions. They reward behavior. And most of the time, the behavior being tested has nothing to do with spreadsheets and everything to do with psychology, fear, patience, conviction, discipline. Those are the real currencies being traded when volatility shows up uninvited. Price is loud. Value is quiet. Price moves fast. Value moves slowly. And the confusion between the two is where most people get hurt. A number on a screen at 3 in the morning feels urgent, but urgency is not information. It's emotion wearing a stopwatch. What you witnessed wasn't a verdict on silver, or on any asset for that matter. It was a demonstration, a stress test, a reminder of how markets behave when attention disappears and systems take over. The people who understand that don't panic when the screen misbehaves. They ask why, and that question alone puts them on a different side of the trade. If you sold in fear, don't beat yourself up. That's wasted energy. Learn from it. If you didn't sell, don't get arrogant. That's how the market humbles you next time. The goal isn't to be right once. It's to build a mindset that survives repetition, because this will happen again. Different asset, different excuse. Same script, thin liquidity, fast move, emotional response, and the same quiet transfer from impatient hands to patient ones. The screen will always try to rush you. Headlines will always try to scare you. That's their job. Your job is simpler and harder at the same time. Stay rational when the environment is designed to make you emotional. Understand the structure instead of reacting to the noise. And remember that value doesn't vanish just because a chart throws a tantrum. I'll say it as plainly as possible. If you let the screen think for you, you will always be late. If you understand the mechanism behind the screen time starts working for you instead of against you. And here's the line I want you to remember the next time everything feels urgent and broken: the market doesn't punish ignorance nearly as much as it punishes impatience.